Aries, pause for a moment, because if this found you now, something already shifted. You didn't say goodbye, you didn't explain, you didn't fight for it anymore. You just pulled your energy back. And the truth is, they felt it. The second you stopped reaching, the second you stopped holding the door open, something inside them snapped awake. They're not imagining losing someone, they're imagining losing you. And for the first time, that fear is louder than their pride. So, before we go any further, I want you to listen with your heart, not your defenses. If this resonates, let me know in the comments. And most importantly, trust yourself. Because what's unfolding now is much bigger than you think. Stay with me for a second, Aries. Not because you need convincing, but because something in you already knows this is true. There are moments when energy speaks louder than words. You didn't announce anything. You didn't create a scene. You simply shifted. It was subtle notice, the way your presence softened, the way your attention no longer chased, the way your silence carried weight instead of absence. And that was the moment they felt it. They may not have understood it right away. At first, it probably felt like confusion, like something familiar suddenly felt unstable beneath their feet, as if the room was the same, but the air had changed. What they didn't realize at first was that the safety net they assumed would always be there had quietly loosened. And that realization did something to them. Because when someone like you steps back, not out of anger, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect, it forces a truth to surface. They began to imagine a version of life where your energy was no longer woven into their days. No quiet reassurance, no grounding presence, no feeling of being met exactly where they are. And for the first time, they didn't imagine freedom, they imagined loss. That is the part they weren't prepared for. You see, Aries, people often mistake your fire for intensity alone, but what truly shifts others is your consistency, your ability to show up with warmth and courage even when it costs you something. So, when that warmth pulled back even just slightly, it echoed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was honest. And honesty has a way of shaking loose everything that was being avoided. They started replaying moments they once rushed past, the way you listened without trying to fix them, the way you made space for their imperfections, the way you never demanded more than truth. That is when fear arrived, not fear of being alone, but fear of losing the one person who made them feel fully seen without pressure. And here is the part I want you to hear closely. This fear did not come from guilt, it came from clarity. Because when someone realizes they may lose something irreplaceable, their soul responds before their mind catches up. They are sitting with that now, quietly, honestly, letting it sink in, not because you forced it, but because you stopped abandoning yourself, and that is where the story deepens. So, take a breath here, let your shoulders soften. You don't need to do anything else, just allow yourself to stay present. Because what comes next is not about chasing or proving or holding on tighter. It is about what happens when truth finally has room to speak, and we are just beginning to listen. You didn't do anything wrong, Aries, and I need you to really let that land, because somewhere along the way, you were taught that stepping back meant giving up, that silence meant failure, that choosing yourself meant losing something valuable. But this time, it wasn't avoidance, it was alignment. You didn't pull away to punish them. You didn't withdraw to make a point. You simply stopped pouring from a place that was already empty. That shift mattered more than you realize. When you turned your energy inward, something ancient woke up. Not just in you, in them. They felt the absence of your effort before they noticed your absence as a person. The texts that no longer carried urgency. The way you stopped anticipating their needs. The way your presence became calm instead of compensating. And for someone who had grown comfortable with your warmth, that quiet was loud. You see, Aries, your fire isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's steady, protective, grounded. So when that fire stopped reaching outward, it didn't feel cold. It felt unfamiliar. They didn't immediately think you were leaving. At first, they thought you were just tired, distracted, busy with life. But as the days moved on, they realized something deeper. You weren't waiting, and that realization unsettled them. Because without your energy cushioning the connection, they had to sit with their own. They had to notice the imbalance, the way they leaned back while you leaned in, the way they assumed time was unlimited. It wasn't dramatic, it was honest. And honesty has weight. They began to feel the space where your effort used to live, not empty, just quieter, more self-contained. And in that space, questions surfaced, not about you, about themselves. Why did it feel so strange without your constant presence if they were so sure they were fine before? Why did your calm create discomfort instead of relief? That's when the truth began to stir. They had grown used to you being there, not just physically, energetically, your attention, your patience, your willingness to hold emotional space without asking for much in return. And when that stopped flowing outward, they felt exposed, like standing in a room where the lights dimmed slowly, not suddenly, but enough to make them realize they had been relying on the glow. This wasn't loss yet. It was awareness, the kind that arrives quietly and lingers. And here's the part I want you to hear gently. Their awakening was not triggered by confrontation. It was triggered by your self-respect, by your decision to return to yourself without closing your heart. That kind of shift doesn't push people away. It calls truth forward. So, if you're wondering whether your silence mattered, whether your restraint was noticed, whether choosing yourself changed anything at all, it did. Because now, they are sitting with the absence of what they once took for granted. And in that stillness, they are beginning to see you clearly. And as we move forward together, what unfolds next is not about regret or fear or control. It's about what happens when someone finally realizes the energy they felt safest inside was never guaranteed. There's something else they didn't expect, Aries. And this part is quieter, but deeper. For a long time, they believed the door was still open. Not because they were careless, not because they didn't care, but because they assumed life would always present more options. They told themselves there was time, that nothing needed to be decided yet, that connections could remain undefined without consequence. And for a while, that illusion felt comfortable. But after you entered their world, something shifted without announcement. The room didn't change. The conversations didn't suddenly become dramatic, but the atmosphere did. Because once you were there, every new face that appeared afterward felt different. Not wrong, just empty. They noticed it in small moments, a laugh that didn't linger, a conversation that stayed on the surface, a connection that sparked but never settled. And each time, something inside them quietly compared the feeling, not in judgment, in awareness. They began to realize that what they felt with you wasn't excitement alone, it was resonance, a sense of being met instead of entertained, seen instead of admired. That's when the idea of having endless choices started to lose its shine. Because Aries, not all connections carry weight. Some pass through, some impress, some distract, but very few feel like home. They didn't understand that distinction before you. They thought chemistry was enough, that attraction could replace depth, that presence could be substituted. But after you, every other energy felt like an echo. Not bad, just incomplete. And that realization unsettled them more than they expected. Because when someone recognizes that what they felt with you cannot be recreated, they are forced to face something uncomfortable. The truth that they weren't choosing between options. They were choosing between alignment and avoidance. You weren't better than others in a competitive sense. You were different in a fundamental one. You didn't demand attention. You didn't perform. You didn't try to stand out. You simply showed up as yourself, and that made everything else feel hollow by comparison. They began to understand that what they experienced with you was not something they could find. Again, by looking outward, because it wasn't about who else existed. It was about what was activated in them when you were near. That's the part they can't unsee now. And it's not romanticized nostalgia, it's clarity. They're realizing that the space they kept open for possibilities was never actually about curiosity. It was about fear. Fear of committing to something real. Fear of choosing depth over distance. Fear of allowing themselves to want one thing fully. But once you entered their life, that fear was exposed. Because you didn't replace their options. You revealed how little those options truly offered. And now, in the quiet moments, when there's no distraction to soften the truth, they feel it. Not regret, recognition. They understand that what they felt with you cannot be replicated through variety. It can only be honored through presence. And as that understanding settles, the story continues to unfold. Not through action yet, but through awareness. Because the moment someone realizes they were never choosing between people, but between courage and comfort, everything begins to rearrange itself, and you, Aries, are standing right at the center of that realization. There is a reason they keep returning to the way you feel, Aries. Not the way you look, not what you say, but the way your presence settles something inside them. You offer something that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't sparkle loudly across the room. It simply feels safe. And that safety didn't come from control or certainty. It came from permission. With you, they didn't have to perform. They didn't have to arrive polished or impressive. They didn't have to hold themselves together at all costs. Around you, their nervous system finally softened. They could laugh without guarding the sound. They could admit confusion without fear of being diminished. They could show the unfinished parts of themselves and feel no urgency to hide them. That is rare, Aries. Rarer than attraction. Rarer than chemistry. Because safety is not about comfort alone. It is about being allowed to exist without defense. When they were with you, something younger in them came forward. Not childish, but honest. The part that remembers wonder. The part that trusts instinct. The part that believes it is enough simply to be. That inner space had been locked away for a long time. You see, this is someone who learned early that strength meant control, that love required proof, that worth had to be demonstrated through achievement or endurance. They became skilled at holding themselves upright, at leading, at managing outcomes. But that strength came with weight, and when they entered your energy, that weight loosened. Not because you took it away, but because you didn't add to it. You didn't ask them to be more. You didn't ask them to arrive completed. You met them exactly where they were. And for someone who has lived most of their life braced, that feels like oxygen. This is why you are a gem in their eyes. Not because you shine louder than others, but because you illuminate without burning. You allow space. You invite truth. You offer steadiness without demand. That combination is uncommon. They noticed how time felt different with you. Slower, more grounded. Moments stretched instead of rushing past. Conversations breathed instead of filling silence. And in that breathing space, they felt free. Free to change. Free to not have answers. Free to show up differently on different days. They realized that with you, love didn't feel like pressure. It felt like shelter. And that is something they didn't know they were searching for until they found it. This is why every other connection afterward felt thin. Because once you've felt safety at that depth, everything else feels like noise. They may not have named it at the time. They may not have understood what made you different. But their body knew. Their heart knew. And now, as awareness continues to unfold, that knowing is rising to the surface. Not with urgency, not with panic, but with clarity. So, as you sit here listening, know this. You did not become valuable by doing more. You became irreplaceable by being real. And as this truth settles into them, the story moves gently forward, not toward proving love, but toward recognizing it. And what comes next is shaped by what happens when someone finally understands that the place they could breathe was never ordinary. There is something they rarely admit out loud, Aries, something they tucked away quietly long before you ever arrived. At some point, they stopped believing in the kind of love that stays, not because they were cynical, but because life taught them to lower expectations in order to survive. They told themselves that deep connection was rare, that timing never aligned, that wanting too much only led to disappointment. So they adjusted, they accepted almost. They learned how to function without hoping. And for a while, that felt safer. Then you showed up, not with fireworks, not with promises, just presence. You didn't arrive according to a plan they had prepared for. You didn't fit the narrative they had written to protect themselves. You came from a place they weren't watching, and that is what unsettled them. Because when someone has already made peace with the idea that real love may never come, its sudden appearance feels less like a gift and more like a disruption. You didn't just awaken desire, you awakened doubt, not about you, about everything they thought they knew. They felt something open inside them that had been closed for a long time, something tender, something hopeful, something they believed they had outgrown. And with that opening came fear, because hope asks for vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the structures they built to stay steady. They wondered how someone like you could exist without an agenda, how this ease could be real, how something that felt so aligned could arrive without warning. It was easier at first to question the moment than to trust it. So they hesitated, not because they didn't feel it, but because they felt it too clearly. You challenged a belief they had already mourned, the belief that love like this was no longer available to them, and that contradiction created tension. On one hand, they were drawn to you, the way you moved through the world, the way you didn't force connection, the way you allowed things to unfold naturally. On the other hand, they were disoriented, Because if love like this could appear out of nowhere, then the story they told themselves for years was incomplete. That realization shook them. They began replaying old conclusions, moments when they gave up too early, times when they told themselves not to want more. And then there was you, standing quietly at the center of that reckoning. You didn't ask them to believe. You didn't push. You didn't demand reassurance. You simply existed as proof. And proof can be terrifying when it contradicts a long-held defense. They weren't confused about you. They were confused about what your presence meant. Because if you were real, then maybe love was still possible. And if love was still possible, then they could be hurt again. That is the paradox they are sitting with now. Not doubt, but vulnerability, awakening. So, if you ever wondered why they seemed both drawn and uncertain, why their energy wavered between warmth and restraint, this is why. You arrived at the exact moment they had decided not to hope anymore. And the universe does that sometimes. It places light directly in front of someone who has just learned how to live in the dark. As this truth continues to unfold, what comes next is not about confusion. It is about what happens when someone realizes the love they stopped believing in has been standing quietly beside them all along. There was a moment, Aries, when the idea of losing you stopped being abstract. It stopped being a thought. It became a feeling, not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to cut through distraction. When your energy pulled back, even slightly, they didn't just notice your absence. They noticed what disappeared with it, the warmth that softened their edges, the rhythm they had grown used to, the sense that someone was quietly holding space for them, even when nothing was said. That's when fear arrived, not panic, not chaos, but something deeper, a hollow pause. They imagined waking up without your presence woven into their day. No subtle check-in, no grounding awareness that you were somewhere nearby, emotionally, energetically. And that image didn't feel peaceful, it felt flat. That realization unsettled them more than they expected, because they had told themselves they were fine, independent, unattached. They believed they could move through life without leaning too deeply into anyone. But when the possibility of you being gone entered the room, everything else suddenly felt colorless. Conversations they once enjoyed felt surface level. Moments that once distracted them lost their shine. Even successes felt quieter without someone to share the weight of them. That's when they understood something they hadn't allowed before. You weren't an addition to their life. You were a dimension of it. And imagining life without that dimension felt like walking through familiar streets with the lights turned off. They didn't want to admit it at first, so they sat with the discomfort. They tried to reason with it, telling themselves it was temporary, that it would pass, that they were simply reacting to change. But fear has a way of revealing truth when it's not ignored. The more they sat with it, the clearer it became. Losing you wouldn't just mean missing a person. It would mean losing the version of themselves that felt most honest around you. The one who didn't have to prove, the one who didn't have to brace, the one who could just be. That loss felt unbearable. And so something inside them began to shift, not outwardly yet, not in action or words, but internally. They started questioning their own patterns, the way they kept distance to feel safe, the way they delayed clarity to avoid vulnerability. And in that questioning, they met themselves honestly. They realized that what scared them most was not losing you. It was realizing how deeply they already cared, because caring invites risk, and risk asks for courage. You see, Aries, fear doesn't always show up to destroy something. Sometimes it arrives to protect what matters. The fear of losing you is doing exactly that. It is stripping away avoidance. It is dissolving excuses. It is asking them to face the truth they've been circling, that you are not replaceable, that what you offer cannot be recreated, that what they feel with you deserves to be acknowledged. They are standing at that edge now, not rushing, not running, just standing still long enough to let the truth speak. And as that truth continues to rise, something else begins to take shape. Not desperation, not control, but intention. Because when someone finally understands what they stand to lose, they also begin to understand what they are willing to protect. And that awareness quietly changes everything. So, stay with me here. Breathe. Because what unfolds next is not driven by fear alone. It is shaped by what happens when fear gives way to honesty. There is something quietly forming inside them now, Aries. Not a decision yet, not a declaration, but a readiness. They have not spoken, not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much to rush it. This is someone who understands the weight of words, someone who knows that once something is said out loud, it cannot be taken back. And so, they are sitting with the truth first, turning it over slowly, letting it settle into their bones. They are replaying moments where silence could have cost them you, moments where hesitation felt safer than honesty. And for the first time, those moments no longer feel neutral. They feel dangerous. Because now they understand what is at stake. They know that your patience is not endless, that your warmth is not unconditional access, that your presence is a choice you make every day. And the thought of that choice changing has brought them face to face with themselves. They are asking questions they avoided before. Not about you, about them. Why they held back when they felt drawn forward. Why they waited when clarity was already present. Why they protected themselves at the cost of connection. These are not easy reflections. They are not comfortable, but they are honest. And honesty is doing something powerful right now. They are beginning to see that staying silent is no longer neutral. That inaction is a decision of its own. They can feel the moment approaching when they will have to step forward or watch you step away. And this time, that thought does not feel survivable. They are imagining what it would be like to never hear your voice again in the quiet moments, to never feel your energy steady the room, to never be known in the way you know them. That future feels empty. So, they are preparing themselves, not rehearsing lines, not crafting an image, preparing emotionally. They want to speak from a place that is real, not reactive, not defensive. They want to meet you without armor, without games, without the half-truths they once hid behind, because they know you would feel the difference immediately. This conversation is not being rushed because it matters too much to mishandle. They are learning that courage is not loud. It does not announce itself. It builds quietly until silence is no longer an option, and that courage is gathering now. You may sense it already, in the way their energy feels more focused, more present, less scattered. They are aligning themselves with something they once feared, vulnerability, not because they suddenly became brave, but because losing you feels heavier than being seen. And that shift changes everything. This is not about promises yet. It is about truth making its way to the surface, a truth that wants to be spoken carefully, respectfully, in its own time. So, if it feels like something is hanging in the air between you, it is. Not tension, anticipation. The kind that comes before honesty finally finds its voice. Stay open here, stay grounded, because what is coming next is not a confession born of panic. It is a truth shaped by reflection. And when it arrives, it will come quietly, directly, without disguise. And that is where the story takes its next breath. So now, Aries, this is where your part of the story gently comes into focus. Not with action, not with effort, but with presence. You don't need to chase what is already turning toward you. You don't need to explain yourself again. You don't need to make your value clearer than it already is. The work you did was internal, and it mattered. You stood your ground without hardening your heart. You chose yourself without closing the door completely. You allowed space without disappearing. That balance is powerful. Right now, your only responsibility is to remain rooted in who you are, to keep your spine straight and your heart open at the same time, to let what is unfolding meet you where you stand. There is a quiet strength in that. Because when someone is being moved by the fear of losing you, what they need most is not pressure, it is permission. Permission to come forward honestly. Permission to speak without being interrupted by expectation. Permission to arrive as they are, not as who they think they should be. Your calm creates that permission. Your steadiness is not passive, it is magnetic. You are not waiting, you are receiving. And there is a difference. Receiving means trusting that what is meant to find you will do so without you abandoning yourself in the process. It means believing that clarity does not require force. It arrives when the timing aligns. Right now, something is aligning. You may feel it as a quiet knowing, a soft certainty beneath the surface. Not excitement, not anxiety. Just a sense that something real is preparing to meet you. Let that be enough. You don't need to rehearse conversations in your head. You don't need to imagine outcomes. You don't need to protect yourself from a future that hasn't arrived. Stay here. Breathe into the space you've created, because the energy shifting toward you is not coming from fear alone. It is coming from realization. They are realizing what your absence would mean, They are realizing what your presence has been giving them. They are realizing that what you offer is not ordinary, and that realization has weight. So when the moment comes, whether through words or through actions, let yourself receive it without shrinking. You are allowed to be met. You are allowed to be chosen without proving why. You are allowed to be loved in ways that feel steady and real. This is not about control, it is about alignment. You didn't change yourself to be seen. You became more yourself. And that is what changed everything. So stay open, stay grounded, stay exactly where you are. Because the next step in this story does not require you to move first. It requires you to trust that what has been awakened is already finding its way toward you. And when it does, you will recognize it. Not by the noise it makes, but by how naturally it fits into the life you have already built. That is where this chapter settles, and where the next one quietly begins. And Aries, before you leave this space tonight, let me say this gently but clearly. What you felt listening to this was not coincidence. It wasn't imagination, and it wasn't wishful thinking. It was recognition. You didn't lose your power by stepping back. You didn't miss your chance by choosing yourself. You activated something real by finally honoring your worth. That shift you made didn't push love away. It called truth forward. So if part of you is wondering whether you should have stayed quieter, tried harder, or explained more, let that question rest. Because the kind of love meant for you does not require you to disappear to be chosen. It meets you where you stand. And right now, Aries, you are standing exactly where you need to be. Open, grounded, aware. If this message reached you, it's because you're ready to receive what matches your growth, not what tests your endurance. So, trust yourself, trust the timing, and trust the silence that spoke louder than words. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below, not for me, for yourself. So you can mark this moment, and if you feel called to stay connected, subscribe to the channel. This journey doesn't end here. There are more messages coming, more clarity unfolding, more chapters opening as you continue choosing yourself without apology. Take a deep breath with me, let it out slowly. You're not behind, you're not late, and you're not asking for too much. You're simply stepping into a life that finally meets you back. The next message is already on its way. Until then, stay present, stay open, and remember, your story is still unfolding.